Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder if the medicines prescribed to children for anxiety are truly helping more than hurting them? Today we're diving deep into a critical look at Escitalopram, a common antidepressant, and its use for generalized anxiety disorder in kids and teens. This study isn't just looking at whether it works, but also if the benefits truly outweigh the risks, especially for such a young and vulnerable population. It is a story about scientific evidence, how decisions are made, and what that means for families. So, picture this: a medication, Escitalopram, gets approved by the FDA for generalized anxiety disorder in kids and teenagers. Seems like good news, right? More options for struggling families. But here is where this research team, led by some very smart folks, asks a really important question: are we sure this approval is backed by solid evidence? Meaning the good stuff really outweighs the bad stuff. They take a close look at the big study that led to this approval and the FDA's own review document. Let's talk about how they tested this. The main way they measured if the drug was working was using something called the Pediatric Anxiety Rating Scale, or PARS for short. Think of it like a special checklist for doctors to rate how anxious a child is. They tracked this for 8 weeks, comparing kids who took escitalopram to kids who took a placebo, which is like a sugar pill that looks identical but has no active medicine. Now for the results. On this PAR scale, the difference between the kids on escitalopram and the kids on placebo was a mean of minus 1.4 points. That is a number, and it was statistically significant, meaning it is unlikely to be just a fluke or random chance. A p-value of 0.03 tells us there is about a 3% chance this result happened by accident. But here is the kicker. And this is what the researchers really dug into. They asked, what does minus 1.4 points really mean in the real world for a child's anxiety? They found that experts have estimated that a clinically meaningful improvement on this PAR scale is usually around 4 points or more. So, a 1.4 point difference, while statistically real, might not actually translate to a noticeable change in how much better a child feels or functions. The researchers calculated something called a standardized mean difference, or SMD, and found it to be minus 0.3. They argue that this is well below the standard benchmark of 0.5, which is generally considered the point where an improvement is truly significant for patients. What is also striking is how well the placebo group did. They saw 83% of the symptom reduction that the escitalopram group saw. This suggests that things like simply being part of a study, feeling cared for, or even the natural ups and downs of anxiety could have played a big role. It makes you wonder how much of the drug's effect was truly unique. And it gets more complicated. When they looked closer at the data, especially when dealing with missing information from participants who dropped out, the statistical significance of the drug's effect disappeared in some of these more informative analyses. The FDA itself even commented that a later analysis by the drug company didn't handle the data consistently. This raises serious questions about the reliability of the positive findings. Beyond the main finding, all the other measures they looked at to see if the drug helped kids reach remission or significant response were also not statistically significant. The numbers were very close to what you'd expect by chance. This really paints a picture of weak efficacy overall. Now, let's get to the crucial part, the harms. The drug company and the FDA suggested that problems like suicidal thoughts were rare. But the researchers here looked at the actual numbers and found a different story. In the study, almost 10% of children on escitalopram reported suicidal thoughts. That is compared to only 1.5% in the placebo group. This is a significant difference. The odds ratio of 6.7 means that children taking escitalopram were nearly 7 times more likely to experience suicidal thoughts than those taking the placebo. This was a statistically significant finding, meaning it is highly unlikely to be random. This means that for every 14 children treated with escitalopram, one more child, compared to placebo, might experience suicidal ideation. This is a really important number to consider when weighing benefits against risks. And it wasn't just about suicidal thoughts. Other side effects like trouble sleeping, nausea, and diarrhea were also much more common in the escitalopram group. Over 55% of kids on the drug experienced side effects, compared to about 37% on placebo. That is a number needed to harm of just 6 for these general side effects. Adding to the concerns, the researchers found a significant problem with how the study was conducted. There was a major deviation in the protocol where participants mistakenly continued taking the full dose of the medication even when they were supposed to be tapering off it. This could have definitely impacted the safety evaluation. So, here is the big picture. The FDA's conclusion was that the benefits of escitalopram outweigh the risks for pediatric GAD. However, this research team has presented a very different interpretation. They argue that the efficacy, meaning how well it worked, was likely not clinically meaningful. The statistical significance they found was uncertain, especially when looking at more robust analyses. And critically, the harms, particularly the increased risk of suicidal thoughts, were significant and concerning. The starkest finding for these researchers is that children on escitalopram were more likely to become suicidal than to experience a meaningful improvement in their anxiety. This is a profound statement about the harm-benefit ratio. The authors are upfront about the limitation. Their arguments are based on secondary analyses of the data. This means they're looking at the data from different angles than the original study might have intended. However, they point to other studies that have analyzed large trials of medications for children and found similar patterns of questionable research practices that might exaggerate benefits and downplay harms. Without access to the raw data themselves, they can't definitively say those practices were at play here, but it is an important consideration. Given all this, the researchers are suggesting that the FDA should seriously reconsider this approval. They highlight that the odds of a child becoming suicidal on the drug were much higher than the odds of them even showing a response to the anxiety symptoms. They propose that the black box warning about suicidality, which is the FDA's strongest warning, might not be enough to truly address the risks. They emphasize the need for honest conversations with families about the limited evidence of meaningful benefit, the evidence of harm, and the importance of exploring alternative approaches and close monitoring if medication is used. The findings on suicidality are particularly important because they align with the FDA's existing black box warning. This warning, however, has sometimes been based on what these researchers see as relatively weak evidence. Their analysis provides more substantial data that seems to support the urgency and seriousness of that warning. So, what is my take on all of this? This is a really important paper because it forces us to look beyond a simple yes or no question about a drug's effectiveness. It shines a light on the complex and often murky process of drug approval, especially for children. The researchers have done a thorough job of dissecting the evidence. And their conclusion that the harm-benefit ratio seems problematic is hard to ignore. The significant increase in suicidal thoughts compared to a modest and potentially insignificant reduction in anxiety symptoms is a major concern. It makes you wonder if the rush to find pharmacological solutions sometimes overlooks the potential for harm in vulnerable populations. This study challenges us to demand more rigorous evidence and a more thorough understanding of risks before approving medications for children. Future really needs to focus on identifying which children, if any, might genuinely benefit from these medications without experiencing a disproportionate increase in risks like suicidality. And that is it for this dive into the science. What do you think about these findings? Do you have any experiences or questions about anxiety medication for young people? Let us know in the comments below. If you found this helpful, please give this video a thumbs up. Subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more science breakdowns and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next episode. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.